In the first century of the Roman Empire, Emperor Domitian emerged as one of its most controlling rulers. He came to power in 81 AD, following the assassination of his brother, Emperor Titus. His reign began with promises of order, reform, and restoration of Roman morality. Domitian believed Rome was decaying under luxury and moral decline. To him, the empire needed fear more than love. He began by strengthening the army, increasing soldiers' pay, and reinforcing the empire's northern frontiers. His rule quickly became defined by strict discipline and surveillance. The emperor viewed loyalty as the foundation of peace. Senators, philosophers, and generals were required to swear oaths not only to Rome, but to Domitian personally. This transformation marked a shift from republican ideals to absolute rule. His word became law, and questioning it meant questioning Rome itself. Domitian was not without intelligence or skill. He was an administrator who modernized taxation and rebuilt structures destroyed by earlier fires. His passion for architecture led to the completion of the Flavian Palace and restoration of temples honoring Jupiter and Minerva. Yet behind the public works, a darker mechanism of control was taking shape. He saw the Senate as a nest of conspirators. Informers were rewarded handsomely, and accusations of treason became a political weapon. Anyone suspected of speaking ill of the emperor, even in jest, could face interrogation. Speech became dangerous, and silence became survival. Under Domitian, Rome turned into a city of watchers. Servants listened to their masters, and friends observed one another. The emperor often disguised himself at night to walk the streets, listening for rumors. Fear of his presence extended even into private homes. Despite his paranoia, he cultivated the image of a just and divine ruler. He referred to himself as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Statues bearing his likeness filled temples, and festivals were held in his name. Refusal to participate in such honors was seen as treachery. Domitian's control extended into religion. Philosophers who criticized tyranny were expelled from Rome. Astrologers and soothsayers were executed for predicting his death. He sought to remove any source of prophecy that might challenge his permanence. The emperor was deeply superstitious. He carried amulets, feared lightning, and interpreted omens with seriousness. His reliance on divine favor was both personal and political. He built temples to Jupiter, but his real goal was to place himself among the gods. Domitian maintained a small inner circle of advisors who lived in constant tension. His secretaries and guards understood that any mistake could be fatal. Letters, poems, and even gestures were scrutinized. Once loyal men were accused of blasphemy for words spoken in private moments. His reign also saw a renewed interest in punishment as a display of state power. Public executions were meant to reinforce loyalty to Caesar and deter dissent. Torture was institutionalized, used not just for confession but as proof of submission. Domitian's palace became a fortress of judgment. He spent hours reviewing reports of treason, each one feeding his sense of divine authority. He was not cruel for pleasure, but convinced cruelty was order. To him, Rome's survival depended on silencing all seeds of rebellion. His obsession with purity extended into morality laws. He punished adultery, restricted public performances, and enforced traditional family roles. Yet these reforms were less about virtue and more about dominance over private life. Domitian's reign also reshaped the relationship between emperor and citizen. The people of Rome began to view the emperor not as a protector, but as an unpredictable force. Applause during his appearances was careful and calculated. Even the theater became a stage for political approval. Writers and historians of the time, including Tacitus and Suetonius, recorded the growing climate of fear. The Senate's dignity was reduced to obedience. Its members passed decrees that praised Domitian's divinity. Knowing refusal meant execution. The emperor's fascination with control reached a point where even words were seen as threats. A poem, a rumor, or an accusation could be enough to warrant punishment. In Domitian's Rome, truth was dangerous, and speech was an act of risk. It was during this climate that new instruments of torture began to appear in the empire's record. Designed to restrain and punish those who spoke against Caesar, These tools became symbols of absolute silence. They were reserved for philosophers, priests, and soldiers accused of spreading treason through their tongues. The device known as the iron fork was among the earliest used to enforce this policy. It was a double-pronged clamp that held the jaw and tongue apart, preventing speech and often leading to death through exhaustion or suffocation. In Domitian's view, such instruments were not barbaric but necessary. They preserved order through fear and ensured Rome remained united under divine rule. Those who dared to speak were reminded that the empire listened and that Caesar's justice was both inventive and final. By the end of the first decade of his reign, Rome was outwardly stable but inwardly suffocated. The streets were quiet, temples full, and no one dared to question authority aloud. The empire had peace, but it was the kind born of fear rather than faith. Domitian believed he had achieved perfection in governance. To him, the silence of his people was not oppression, but harmony. He had built an empire where truth no longer spoke, and in that silence, he heard only loyalty. The iron fork would soon become more than a tool. It would stand as a symbol of what it meant to rule through silence, a weapon crafted not for war, but for the control of speech itself. And under Domitian's reign, silence became Rome's greatest law. Quick reminder. If you are enjoying, do like the video and subscribe the channel for upcoming historical content. By the middle years of Domitian's reign, the empire's system of punishment had evolved into a machinery of silence. The emperor's council began codifying methods to suppress speech against the divine. Words became crimes, and torture became testimony. The iron fork, first used in secret tribunals, soon entered the public record as a legitimate tool of imperial justice. This instrument was deceptively simple. 2 iron prongs extended from a hinge, one fitted beneath the jaw and the other above the tongue. When fastened with a strap around the neck, it forced the mouth open, preventing the victim from swallowing or speaking. The design was created not to mutilate immediately, but to hold the subject in a state of unbearable restraint. The procedure began with accusation. A citizen, senator, or soldier charged with impietas, disrespect towards Caesar, would be taken to the Domus Publica, where imperial guards maintained order. There, scribes recorded every confession, and witnesses were questioned under oath. Silence during interrogation was treated as guilt. The accused would then be bound upright to a wooden frame. The executioner, often a skilled craftsman known as the carnifex, adjusted the iron fork beneath the chin. Once locked, the prongs pressed against the soft tissues of the mouth, forcing it open until the tongue swelled and dried. It was not a swift punishment. Victims often survived for hours, conscious but voiceless. Domitian's officials justified this as an act of purification. They claimed the fork separated falsehood from speech, cleansing Rome of blasphemy. In reality, it served as a warning that speech belonged to the emperor alone. Even whispers carried the weight of treason. Records from the time mention several victims. Philosophers accused of questioning divine authority were the first to face the iron fork. Among them was Aelius Marcellus, a Stoic teacher known for his lectures on moral independence. He was seized after a student reported that Marcellus compared the emperor to a mortal man. Under interrogation, he refused to retract his words. The iron fork silenced him permanently. Military officers were not exempt. One centurion, Lucius Crassus, was punished after making a remark about Caesar's temper during a feast. The statement was overheard by a servant, reported to the Praetorian Guard, and interpreted as ridicule. Crassus was executed publicly, his punishment intended to remind the legions that discipline extended beyond the battlefield. The Senate, once Rome's voice of governance, became a chamber of controlled obedience. During meetings, members spoke cautiously, measuring every phrase. Many learned to replace opinions with praise. When senators hesitated to applaud Domitian's decrees, he accused them of conspiracy. The iron fork awaited those who resisted public flattery. The device's spread was not limited to Rome. Provincial governors adopted it as a method to enforce loyalty in distant territories. Reports from Hispania and Gaul describe its use against local leaders accused of mocking imperial cults. Inscriptions found centuries later mention the fork of divine silence, linking punishment with sacred duty. Domitian's engineers refined the instrument for efficiency. Later versions were crafted from bronze, resistant to rust, and capable of greater precision. Some included a small chain that fastened to the wrists, forcing the condemned to remain upright. Others featured spikes that pressed deeper into the tongue to accelerate paralysis. The iron fork's effectiveness lay in its symbolism. It transformed speech into pain and turned confession into an act of survival. Those who endured it often signed false admissions, naming others to end their suffering. In this way, the device created a network of fear that perpetuated itself. Prisoners subjected to the iron fork were rarely executed immediately. Instead, they were displayed in public squares as examples of imperial order. Citizens walked past silently, understanding that a single sentence could lead to the same fate. The absence of protest was proof that the method worked. Domitian personally approved many of these punishments. His presence at interrogations was recorded by scribes, who noted his calm observation of the process. He saw himself not as a tyrant, but as a guardian of purity. In his view, the human tongue was both the instrument of reason and the root of rebellion. To control it was to control Rome. Over time, the iron fork became part of Rome's judicial lexicon. It was categorized under instruments of divine correction alongside branding irons and chains. Manuals for interrogators described its placement, pressure, and duration with clinical detail. The process was standardized, reflecting the empire's obsession with order. The psychological impact of the device was immense. Citizens began to censor themselves. Even families avoided private discussions about politics. Public recitations of poetry grew rare, and writers abandoned satire entirely. The empire's culture shifted from expression to compliance. Foreign envoys visiting Rome recorded their observations with caution. They noted the city's strange silence and the people's controlled demeanor. What appeared as harmony was the product of systematic fear. The iron fork had succeeded where decrees and armies could not. It had conquered thought itself. Despite its cruelty, Domitian viewed the instrument as progress. To him, the empire's strength lay in uniformity. Diversity of opinion threatened stability. He often spoke of his reign as a cure for chaos, a restoration of Roman greatness through disciplined speech. By the final years of his rule, the iron fork had become a symbol engraved in court insignia and official seals. It appeared on reliefs depicting justice, presented not as a tool of pain, but as an emblem of truth restrained. Few questioned its morality. The empire's survival, officials argued, justified all means. And so the iron fork endured, not as an object of horror, but as an accepted part of Roman law. Yet beneath the marble floors of the Flavian palace, resentment grew. The Senate's silence concealed its hatred, and the soldiers' obedience masked unease. Rome had learned to hold its tongue, but not forever. In the years that followed, the very silence Domitian prized would turn against him. The iron fork that muted Rome would, in time, echo with the voice of revolt. But that reckoning was still to come. By the year 96 AD, Emperor Domitian's Rome stood at its quietest. The empire was orderly, its borders secured, and its citizens obedient. Yet that calm was brittle. Beneath the silence he had forced upon the empire, whispers of betrayal moved through his court. The emperor's paranoia, once his shield, had turned against him. He no longer trusted his generals, advisors, or even the Praetorian Guard. Daily, he demanded lists of potential traitors. His secretaries recorded names, some real, some invented, to satisfy his suspicion. The iron fork was still in use, but now its victims were fewer. There were simply too few left who dared to speak at all. Inside the palace, fear had become routine. Servants moved without sound, avoiding eye contact. Senators, summoned for council, left trembling and pale. Many wore amulets against evil, convinced the emperor's presence itself was a curse. Even Domitian's wife, Domitia Longina, lived as a prisoner in luxury, watching her husband's mind erode beneath the weight of control. The final spark came from within his household. One of his freedmen, Stephanus, secretly conspired with court officials and members of the guard. The conspirators understood that open revolt would fail, but silence had made assassination possible. They planned it with precision, exploiting the emperor's routines. Domitian began his day as he always did, reading reports of arrests and signing execution orders. He entered his private chamber alone, guarded by few, trusting in fear more than loyalty. Stephanus approached him under the pretense of delivering another list of traitors. Concealed beneath his robe was a dagger. The emperor's death was sudden and violent. Struck 7 times, he fell within the palace walls he had turned into a fortress. His guards, uncertain whether to intervene, hesitated. When the deed was done, they fled before the Senate could react. For the first time in years, no one feared to speak. News of Domitian's death spread quietly but swiftly. The Senate convened the same day and declared damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of his memory. Statues bearing his likeness were destroyed, inscriptions erased, and temples rededicated. The iron fork, once praised as a divine instrument, was banned and melted into chains for public prisoners. Rome exhaled for the first time in a generation. Philosophers returned to their lectures, poets to their verses, and citizens to their voices. Yet the damage lingered. The habit of silence endured long after the instrument itself disappeared. Generations would recall Domitian's reign not for his architecture or reforms, but for the fear he forged through speechless obedience. The iron fork remained buried in memory, a reminder that tyranny does not always shout. It often whispers, waits, and listens. In Rome's long history of power, it became the ultimate symbol of a truth once silenced and finally spoken again.